Acknowledges that the land on, I don't have it in front of me, so it's gonna not stay in my head. Let's do this right. The city acknowledges that the land on which we gather and that is currently known as the city of West Hollywood is the occupied, unceded, seized territory of the Gabrielino Tonva and the Gabrielino Quiche peoples. We'll get started with a call to order and the Pledge of Allegiance. We'll just stand. I'll lead us in the pledge.
Flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
City Clerk, may we please get a roll call of this fabulous joint study session of the Planning Commission and City Council?
Yes, Mayor, thank you. Mayor Byers.
Present.
Vice Mayor Heilman.
Here.
Councilmember Erickson. Here. Councilmember Hang. Here. Councilmember Meister. Here. Planning Commission Chair Lombardi.
Present.
Planning Commission Vice Chair David Gregoire.
Here.
Commissioner Hoopengarner.
Present.
Commissioner Jones.
Here.
Commissioner Matos.
Present.
Commissioner Solomon.
Here.
We have all members of the City Council noting the absence of Rogerio Carvajaro. I will note for the record that Rogerio is listening to the meeting via Zoom. However, he will not be participating. Thank you.
Terrific. And as we get to the approval of the agenda, I will just note that tonight we have one item on the agenda, which is why we do not have a general public comment period. All public comment will be about the one item on the agenda, so we will take that as part of the agenda item later in the meeting. Are there any other notes that we need to make for the approval of the agenda?
No, Mayor.
We're all set. So tonight we have before us a study session on development agreements and public benefits policy. We're here as a city council and a planning commission, sort of an odd but exciting format for us to get to this discussion. I'm going to turn it over to staff for what will be first a presentation, then a set of questions before we move into our public comment, and then come back to this body for our comments and deliberation. But just to sort of set the tone so people understand what's going on tonight, this is really a matter of education for this group of people, getting us all on the same page. We all have unique roles we play between the public, the Planning Commission, City Council, and staff. And tonight is about us creating a shared understanding of what that is. So I appreciate staff's presentation that you've put together towards that end. And we'll end tonight with some comments and deliberation, not necessarily direction. We're not creating new policy tonight. Just want to make that very clear to folks. This is really just a matter of us getting all on the same page. So I'm going to turn it over to staff to begin the presentation. Thank you.
Good evening. Can everybody hear me okay? Is this on? Okay, great. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and members of the council, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the Planning Commission. I'm Jennifer Alkire. I'm the Assistant Director of Community Development. I'm here with David Wilson, our City Manager, Lauren Langer, City Attorney, Nick Marisich, Director of Community Development, and Brian League, our Property Development Manager. We appreciate everyone taking the time tonight to come together this evening for a conversation about some of the expectations around development agreements, public benefits for billboards, as well as major projects. Over the last few years, the City Council has been asked to make decisions on a number of billboard or development projects that have had development agreements and public benefit components. And in some of those project-specific hearings, we've heard before the Planning Commission and before the City Council some questions regarding how the development agreements are negotiated, what is the role of each of these bodies, and we've done the best we can to answer, but it's tricky to address those topics broadly and take direction for the future in a project-specific meeting. And so that's why we wanted to have this meeting tonight with no specific project on the table, so we can have dig into these topics a little bit more and receive feedback on how we might make the process better. So to accomplish this, we have an agenda here. We're going to go through a lot of information up front. We're going to try to get through our whole presentation, and then we'll take public comment, and then we will dig into conversation. So we're going to walk through the legal framework for development agreement and the roles of each of the bodies in that process. We'll walk through the sunset Arts and Advertising program, giving a general overview of how the development agreements are negotiated there and how we got to the point where we take them to commission and to council. We're going to go through the public benefits related to development projects separate from billboards. We're going to take public comment, like I said, and then we're going to finally tee up some questions for the group first about the billboard projects, then about development agreements for major projects. And our goal is to get some direction on what the City Council is expecting from the Planning Commission, from staff, and from these projects moving forward, and how each body is expecting to engage on these projects. And now I will kick it over to Lauren Linger to address the next few slides.
There we go. Okay, good evening, everybody. Just to finish off Jennifer's introduction, I just wanted to point out that the purpose that we feel of this study session is for information, education, so that everybody who functions on these projects is operating off the same information. Staff, commission, council, and the public. These are complicated projects. There's a lot of moving parts, and you'll see it's going to take us a long time just to get through the explanation of all the different parts to the whole. So we really are glad everybody's here and members of the public too, so this can be educational and we can all be operating off of the same information. As the mayor mentioned, a study session is really just a special meeting of the City Council, and we actually have an extra body with us here tonight, the Planning Commission, and so we are here to focus on this one particular topic. I know there was some concerns about why there wasn't a general public comment session on the agenda, and that's because we're here with two different bodies to talk about one topic tonight. So there'll be plenty of opportunities for public comment later on. And then, as Jennifer mentioned, there really is no action needed tonight. Study sessions are for discussion, and there's no action required. If there's some consensus or some direction or request for more information at a later date, that can come at a later time. We can memorialize it at a later time, but we really want to use this opportunity while everybody's in the room to share information, share feedback. Like Jennifer said, we have some questions at the end that can help guide the discussion. So I'm going to dig in a little bit just to the basics of development agreements so that it's a little boring, but just so everybody understands the framework of what they are, because they're a unique thing that we do. They're different from regular development permits and conditional use permits. They're a legislative act. And so development agreement it's a legally binding contract between a property developer and a local government entity that specifies the terms and conditions for a development project on a particular parcel of land, including the permitted uses, density, design standards, required public benefits in exchange for certain approvals and flexibility in zoning regulations. The purpose of having a development agreement is to provide certainty and stability to developers by outlining the project parameters while allowing local governments to ensure that the development aligns with community goals and receives necessary public amenities and benefits. So it's really about that certainty before a developer engages in a long-term project, to know that the laws aren't going to change, that if they start now, they're going to be able to complete it all the way through to the end. Next slide. And so the basis of development agreements is really about the vested rights, the rights that are granted through this process. So a vested right is a legal right to continue development under the existing approvals despite future changes in the law. The reason that this comes from state law. The reason that the legislature created development agreements is because if you don't have vesting on a project, if there's not certainty that the project can be built throughout the entire lifetime of construction, it can deter large projects because there's just uncertainty. Who's going to start a project if they think 5 years down the road the rules are going to change in the middle and they're not going to know they can finish? So it's really about the certainty, and it locks in the regulations at the time of the agreement. So the statutes where we look to that govern development agreements are in the Government Code 65864 to 65869.5, and that sets out the legal framework, including the required components and procedures for adoption, and those are enhanced in our local municipal code. Did you skip one? I think. Yeah, so the key provisions of a DA that are really set out in the statute are you have to have a duration, so the duration of the agreement and the deadline for completion, and then the timeline is crucial for determining the term and helping cities anticipate project completion. I know we have a lot of conversations here about when are these projects going to get done, and so one benefit of a project with a development agreement is you have a pretty certain timeline of when projects will be built. I mentioned this already, the permitted uses on the land, the maximum allowable development density, intensity, height, size, and then if there's any dedications for public purposes. Next slide. Other key provisions that are going to be included in a DA are to decide which subsequent actions can be approved administratively to facilitate development while protecting city interests. It sets out modification protocols. How are these developments modified over time? Because over the course of a long project, you're also going to see the need for some flexibility and some changes as projects move from design to construction documents to actually being on the ground building. There's always some modification that needs to be made, and so you set out in advance what that's going to look like so everybody knows. Survivability of the terms, phasing of the project, assignment procedures. What if this entity that's building now gets acquired by another company down the road? So you have to lay out all those procedures, and then of course the public benefits, the negotiated advantages. DAs allow cities to secure community benefits that might not be feasible through standard approvals. And so we want to detail the nature, scope, and timing of benefits to ensure that they align with all of the phases of development. So there are 2 public hearings that are required for a development agreement. The first is at Planning Commission. And this is language from the municipal code. Upon finding the application complete, directors shall schedule public hearing. Well, there's a lot that happens in between that time, and that's what we're going to talk to you about tonight and explain that process. So it's not that quick, but that's what the code says. And then the Planning Commission will adopt a resolution with a recommendation to the City Council to approve, conditionally approve, or deny the application. Then City Council gets the recommendation, schedules the public hearing, and the council may approve, conditionally approve, or deny the application. And we talked about this recently, if significant modifications are proposed by the council that haven't been considered by the Planning Commission before, those modifications need to be referred back to the Planning Commission for review. The development agreement is a legislative act, which means it's adopted by ordinance. And in West Hollywood, we have an extra layer to that, which is we require a zone map amendment with every development agreement so that the parcel where the development sits is rezoned with an overlay for the development agreement overlay zone. And that means our zoning map will show every parcel that has a development agreement on it. And there's a lot of reasons and benefit for that, but one of the most notable points is that you can look at the zoning map and you should be able to tell which parcels have these development agreements because their timing, their standards might be a little bit different than other things that you've seen in the zone. I'll turn it back to Jennifer.
Thank you. So from a developer's viewpoint, what is the motivation to do this? Why would somebody come in and want to have a development agreement? Well, similar to what Lauren was saying, the developers seek development agreements for a number of reasons. First and foremost, it gives them that certainty that she was explaining. It gives them certainty about timing and things like fees, development standards, and processes can be locked for the period of time in the term of the DA. And finally, they also, what we see as a driving factor in most of the DAs we have, especially for major projects, is negotiated regulatory flexibility. And that's, again, part of what goes into the development agreement here in West Hollywood. And in other words, that's often changes to things like height, density, land uses, and things like that. So what's in it for the city? From the city's viewpoint, what do we get out of this? We get the same flexibility that allows developers to ask for things above and beyond the zoning. Also gives the city the opportunity to focus on community priorities because the agreement is completely discretionary. The city has more latitude to help define the project and to request or require project benefits and contributions that wouldn't be allowed under normal land use laws. Typically, there has to be some sort of reason why we're asking for certain fees or certain community benefits that are related to the project itself. In a development agreement, we have a lot more flexibility there. This can take the shape of things like more housing, more parking, enhanced public improvements, incentives for valued land uses that promote economic and social development, and other public benefits like we see on all of our projects. So I will turn it back to Lauren for the next slide.
Okay. So the findings that are required when a development agreement is approved are listed in the municipal code. And generally speaking, they're looking at whether the development as a whole and the agreement is in the best interest of the city, consistent with the general plan, specific plan, and zoning ordinance, and that it doesn't adversely affect people working or residing in the area or jeopardize the health, safety, or general welfare. What's going to be, I think, one of the themes we talk about tonight is the general plan and the specific plan and consistency with those things. It's a big part of what is being looked at with these big, complicated projects. The theme that the city council really gives their broad land use direction through these planning documents, the general plan, the sunset specific plan, other specific plans, and on what they want to see, and the central role for the planning commission in implementing that plan, because that's the guiding document. That's what the commission looks at when they're making decisions. Next slide, please. Generally speaking, the role of a planning commission comes from the planning and zoning law and the government code. And it says that planning commissions provide insight and allow councils to make more fully informed decisions on land use and other planning issues. And then the city, in its ordinances, assigns the functions to the planning commission as deemed appropriate and necessary. So land use power sits with the elected body, the city council, and then it's delegated down to the planning commission. And generally, planning commissions help city councils make the best land use decisions that they can. The Institute for Local Government it's an organization that promotes good government at the local level, and they had a really good explanation of planning commission's roles. And they say that planning commissions play a central role in the planning process in 3 ways. 1, acting as an advisory board to the main governing body, here the city council, on all planning and development issues. 2, here's this theme again, assures that the general plan is implemented by reviewing development applications on a case-by-case basis. Just as you build a building one brick at a time, you implement a community one vision at a time, or one project at a time. And then 3rd, functions as the decision-making body for many approvals, but not all. So in West Hollywood, development permits, variances, CUPs, those are all decisions that are made by the city council. And those decisions can be appealed up to the city council, who can then uphold, overturn, modify, or send it back. And other matters, mostly legislative matters, such as amendments to the general plan, the zoning ordinance, and of course, development agreements, the Planning Commission makes recommendations to the City Council, not final decisions. Next slide.
Thank you. So that was the background, super quick background on development agreements and the framework and the findings. And so now we're going to dive into a more specifically the Sunset Specific Plan, Arts and Advertising Program, and then major development projects. So I think we're all basically familiar with how the billboard policy worked up to this point, but I will give a very brief recap because I know there's a lot of people in this room that maybe don't know the whole full history. There was a design excellence screening process that was set out in the Sunset Boulevard offsite signage policy. There was a first round that was awarded Design Excellence Awards in 2020 with the 2 subsequent rounds, one in 2021, which is called 1.5, and one in 22, which is called round 2. The projects were granted Design Excellence Awards, and that means they were allowed to apply for entitlements. That wasn't an approval for an entitlement. So they were allowed to go through the approval process by applying for a development agreement, negotiating design and public benefits, and going through a public hearings process before the Planning Commission and the City Council. There were 2 main types of billboards that we talk about. One is the traditional or static, which is just what you'd imagine, the printed vinyl posted on a frame, uplit or downlit with standard lights. The second, and the one we talk about the most when we see development agreements for billboard projects, are the full motion animated boards, which have also been called digital boards in the past. So the arts component for these full motion digital boards is part of the Sunset Boulevard offsite signage program, and that is 17.5% of the content, where the requirement for arts in the traditional or static is 1% of the valuation of the project, similar to any development project subject to the urban arts program. In addition, for these projects, we're negotiating site improvements, public realm enhancements, and for alternative standards projects, we're looking at extraordinary public benefit. We also have a provision in the policy for historic preservation for cultural resources, and that historic preservation or the rehabilitation of those sites can be considered part of the public realm enhancements or the extraordinary benefit. But the bulk of the public benefit that we're seeing in these projects is coming from the revenue share. And Brian League, Property Development Manager, is here to walk us through how that works.
Thank you, Jennifer. The question we always get is, how does the city calculate revenue for a 30-year agreement? And to do that, we engage a consultant who's an expert in this field. We engage a consultant who's an expert in this field, and they come up with a valuation. It's an estimated valuation for the first year of that billboard, and it's based on three components. The first being reach and impressions. The second is cost per thousands, and that's how many eyeballs will see the boards in cars and pedestrians, and traffic and traffic patterns come into play on that. And the third is a lot more subjective. It's this value driving premium, and this is related to these boards that are creative, full motion, and the type of content they could show on some of those full motion boards. We had a three-dimensional board with a forced perspective that will have a higher valuation because it captures more eyeballs. The other thing is these full motion boards, they're also able to run static advertisements over a 28-day campaign, and they could run multiple static. They could run up to 30 different campaigns during that 28-day period, where a traditional board is running one campaign. So that's why we see the main value in these full motion digital boards. They're not often running animation, but they're running multiple campaigns. And the third, some of these boards, just because of where they're at on the strip, they command a premium just based on their location. Next slide. Next thing is the revenue share. And we're asked often, where do we get these percentages from? And how do we come up with this formula to justify why one developer X is paying something and another developer is paying something else? And all these projects are unique, and they're all different. They all have different settings. They have different costs associated with the public realm enhancements or site improvements. And some of them would rather pay a little more up front. So we have to be flexible with these operators, or they won't be bringing a project forward. So we're always trying to achieve that balance on what's feasible, and if we push too hard, they might walk away. The second question is, we favor the approach to where we get a fixed revenue per year, and we get this, and it escalates at a 3% escalation for the life of the board. And we feel this is a better agreement for the city because it provides certainty in the budgeting process. We're able to see that cash flow and capture it and budget over 30 years of the life of the agreement. The other approach would be an audited revenue share. These billboard operators have multiple boards. They could move campaigns around, and we're just not comfortable or confident that we would have a good shot at auditing that revenue, and it would just be a lot more intensive, a lot more questions. So we have chosen a more conservative path, which is just to provide the city some certainty, and it also avoids disruptions in the future. This is a broad program. If there's going to be many more signs, and if there's saturation, our revenue is guaranteed over the life of the agreement. Next slide. The public realm enhancements, as Jennifer mentioned, they're all required for each of these signs. To qualify, they need a public realm enhancement, a site improvement, and we go through that process, and the public realm enhancement is often proposed with the initial design of the billboard. They were proposed during the design excellence process. So staff is here to refine that public realm design, and we do that in a number of ways. And we work with our city architect, UDAS, our designers, and at one point we feel comfortable enough, we'll bring that billboard design to the Planning Commission subcommittee with the public realm enhancement I see, many of you sit on that subcommittee and you provide feedback. And, sometimes that feedback's enough and we get it to Planning Commission soon. Sometimes it takes 8-10 months for the project to evolve to a point where it's comfortable and think they've, acted towards those recommendations. Next slide. Then we're asked about these alternative standards project. And I want to use the term standards because these are projects that are proposed that exceed the height or size standards of the billboard policy. And we're asked, well, how many of these boards are alternative standard projects? And the answer is about 3/4 of them. And why is that? I mean, I could say because they can, and they are allowed to under the policy. And I think it's for two reasons. There's a lot more creativity with these larger signs, and the second is the revenue on these larger signs it's exponential. There's a lot more creativity, and the city not only benefits with this extraordinary revenue payment, it also participates in that increased revenue. With that, I have one more. That's you.
Thank you. All right. Where am I? So what we've heard and what the council can confirm or add to when we get to the discussion portion is that the Planning Commission is relied upon to hear and consider the totality of the project for these sunset billboard projects. Is this project a good idea in general? Is this what is in the interest of the city based on the guiding documents, vision, and past direction? And in this case, we're not just talking about the official public benefits, but other general benefits of the project, as well as any particular drawbacks. What is the balance that we're striking with these projects? And that is what is at the heart of the recommendation that's coming from staff and that we're expecting to see from the from the Planning Commission as well.
And you ask, how do we get to this recommendation? It's an evolved process, but the public realm is the first part of it that came with the design excellence. Staff, when they feel comfortable with that public realm, enhancement moves it forward to the subcommittee of Planning Commission. And in that review, we've brought in engineering to see if they're feasible, Public Works, UDAS, and all the different divisions within the city. As I said, the subcommittee gives us input, and at that point is when we feel comfortable enough with the design and the public realm enhancements that we'll engage our valuation expert, and that valuation expert prepares that estimated annual fair market value, which is, I showed you how they evolved to that estimate. And that's when we start negotiating the revenue share. And the revenue share is a percentage of that annual fair market value plus extraordinary benefit. And we also factor in if there's extensive capital costs to build that sign and the cash flow. I mean, these signs are expensive, and we give them credit in the first couple of years of the agreements, and they pay us back. And I think you've seen that at council. So once we've come up with these terms, we work with the city attorney's office, and that's where we draft the actual development agreement.
Thank you. Whoops. Yes. Okay. So when the agreement gets to the point of the public hearing, there has been a lot of back and forth. We've gone through the whole process that Brian just outlined. And like I said before, the city team negotiates the agreement using our best understanding of the city's priorities from our vision documents and from past direction that we've gotten at City Council. And it's really tricky to throw new things into that balance. Once we strike the balance, it's sort of an ecosystem. And once you throw something new at the last stage, that gets difficult. But that said, the city has improved our internal processes through these conversations. We've improved our processes to provide clearer documents, and we've updated some of our standard terms and deal points based on what we've heard from the commission and council through this process. So the conversation does have a lot of benefit, and it does improve the process.
Okay, so we're going to move the conversation. So we've really been talking about billboards for the first part of this kind of revenue and public benefit conversation. And as we know, the Sunset Arts and Advertising Program has a revenue share component, public realm enhancements, and extraordinary public benefits. But for other larger development projects, whether or not they have a sign, that's also part of this conversation tonight because they're usually subject to DAs. And the thing that I most wanted to point out was where the public benefit requirement comes from in West Hollywood. So when you all adopted your general plan, I don't remember how many years ago, maybe 10 years ago, the city did something really smart. And it put this language in the general plan, which explains to anyone who wants to do development in West Hollywood and they want to do something above and beyond what these standards call for, that the city will only consider increases in permitted FAR density and height for projects in the commercial designations that provide significant benefits to the city. So this is the language we turn to when a developer comes in and says, but I want to go much higher and I want to do this and I want to do that. The city has the grounds to be able to say, well, if you even want the city to consider that, you have to provide significant benefits to the city and the community. And that's the language that we turn to through the development agreement process.
Thank you. So while we did adopt that language in 2011 in our general plan 2035, that we have projects that predated that still used this process. And so for years through those projects, it was case by case. We didn't have a regulated, uniform way of applying a public benefit evaluation to a project. And so in 2018, the city established a public benefit policy to standardize this process. And we contracted with 3 economic consulting firms and had them analyze what our options were to try to capture the best target public benefit amount. And they all unanimously agreed that the residual land value method was the way to go. And so that's what we use now for our public benefits target. So in addition to standardizing the approach to the value of the public benefits package, the policy establishes a process to involve the public early on to get community input into what that public benefits package may include. We also, I lost my spot, sorry. And it provides it provides a set of steps that we go through. So we have the community benefit, we have the community meeting. Thank you, this was what I was looking for. The project planner gets the project, evaluates it, has a required public neighborhood meeting to discuss what the potential impacts or benefits of the projects are and to solicit input from the community on public benefit scope. After that point, the city staff will hire an independent economic analyst to evaluate the residual land value, like I mentioned, using the standardized public benefits tool. The economic consultant that we engage works with the city only. Any input or any meetings that have to be had with the developer in the room always include city staff. This is how we engage all of our consultants from CEQA to public benefits and other things as well. So there's never direct communication. And some of the inputs into the tool are things that the applicant, I'm still there, are things that the applicant knows that we couldn't know, that it's unique to the project. And so they do give some input into that process, but all of that is vetted by the consultant to make sure that it is consistent with industry practices, that it's a reasonable approach, it fits the project, and so forth. Then the consultant reviews everything, and once we have that target amount, the city manager and the city staff negotiate the deal points of the DA, including the public benefits package. That is a conversation with the developer. Sometimes they have ideas of what they would like to propose. It's part of their project. They can design it into their project. I know we've seen, for instance, on the arts or the former Arts Club project, they have an art gallery that would be open to the public. It was also a performing arts rehearsal space. And so there are certain things that can be developed into the project, and the applicant kind of has to have control over that. And then there can be parts of it that are more monetary that we can ask for as well. And then once that is done, and the city attorney and the applicant's legal counsel will work out the terms of the development agreement. Then once the project is ready, including the CEQA, the design review, all of that stuff, it all comes forward to public hearings. So the public benefit policy staff report included this language with respect to the Planning Commission's role, and it says in yellow here, this will allow for the Planning Commission to weigh in on whether proposed benefits are appropriate for the proposed project while ensuring that the project is being reviewed based on the necessary findings required to be made for the specified permit requested. So what that has been taken to mean over the years is that the Planning Commission can and should provide feedback on whether the requested legislative changes make for a good project. That's the biggest question, right? Is this project a good project? All of it included. Whether the public benefits package makes sense from a land use perspective. Is the public benefits package making sense relative to the legislative changes being asked for? And generally, the Commission is not asked or tasked with evaluating the inputs into the evaluation tool. Things like the construction cost, or if it's a hotel project, the room rates or things like that, the inputs into the tool, but to provide overall land use related feedback on the package and provide recommendation to council on whether the components of the package make sense. Does the project in its whole, in its totality, move the city in the direction of achieving its goals and its vision? And finally, the Planning Commission is asked to take an action and make a recommendation forward, move a recommendation forward to the City Council. And whether that is yes, no, or somewhere in between, the recommendation goes to the City Council. If the City Council then evaluates it and can send staff back to reevaluate things or something along those lines. But the role of the Planning Commission is to move a recommendation forward. And so with that, I will give you a preview of the questions that we're going to seek guidance on. And then, like I said, we'll take public comment and come back to this slide. And so I'll turn it over to Lauren to go through those questions.
So with all of that information in mind, in order to use everybody's time efficiently, we're going to end with some proposed questions for the council and the commission to discuss after public comment that we think will help everybody guide expectations through this process. Because I think the reality is, with the billboard program and other developments on the horizon, there's going to be a lot of development agreements coming through over the next many years. And so I think answering some of these questions during this joint meeting would be helpful in having the council provide their expectations. So as Jennifer had noted, the process has been improved through the discussion at the commission, and the point of all these public hearings is to get to the best document possible for the city. So some things that the council can discuss tonight is what is the best way to use meetings efficiently and effectively? What does the city council want from the planning commission in its recommendation? There's a couple options here. Does the council want the planning commission reviewing inputs into the economic valuation tool? Does the council want the planning commission to recommend changes on components of the benefit package? Does the council want planning commission to weigh in on the overall sufficiency of the public benefits and/or public realm enhancements? And then additionally, are there additional benefits the council would like to see from billboard and/or public benefit projects? As noted, a lot of what guides staff through this whole process is decisions that have already been made and the land use documents that the council has adopted. So those are the guiding documents. For billboards, the terms and benefits are based on past development agreements that have come through. For development projects, the terms and the benefits are based on public benefits policy and the guiding documents. This is the guidance. And we really want to know, what are council's priorities? Are there additional negotiations that you want done, which can have the other benefit of delaying projects coming through? So provide staff, commission, the public, the guidance of what you want to see, and that way this process can work a lot smoother for everybody who's involved. And then the last question that was put up here is, does the city council want to revisit the framework for the public benefit policy and tool or billboard DA terms, which is something that would happen at a later date? That's not decisions that need to be made tonight, but just, the conversation. Is this working the way you want it to, or do you want it to look a little bit different? tell us, and then the process can be improved and enhanced. So that's the goal for tonight. I'll now turn it back over to the mayor if you want to open it up for public comment, and we can navigate that discussion.
Thank you. And as we're getting the public prepared for your opportunity to make comment, please make sure you've submitted your comment request to our city clerk. I'll just let this body know what my plan is. So many of these questions are directed at the council, so I'm gonna come to the council for a first pass. I'm sure we all maybe have need for question clarity, that sort of thing on the presentation. So we'll do a first pass for my council colleagues, go to planning commission, and then come back to council. If we need to do another exchange, we can do it at that time, but my hope is that we can all sort of take a moment to digest, to get our responses clear to some of these questions. If we have a need for clarity, this is gonna be the moment. I'm gonna go to the public now. Oh, maybe our city clerk needs another moment before we're prepared, but I understand we have a couple of public commenters prepared, and then we'll come back to our discussion. Sound good? Terrific.
Sorry about that. Are we moving
ready?
to public comment now?
Yes.
Okay. We had Jonathan Wilson signed up to speak, but I don't see him in chambers, so I will move to Steve Martin.
Come on down, Steve Martin.
Well, thank you, and thank everybody
Steve,
for coming.
okay, there we go. I just wanted to make sure it was on.
Thank you for taking your time to do this. This is, I was long overdue, but the staff presentation was very good, and I think informative. On the most immediate question, I think most of the people of the public would think that the Planning Commission having a review and some input on the development agreement kind of gives the public an opportunity to be heard, and also gives you an opportunity to have like a preview before it comes to council of what the commission's concerns are and what the public's concerns are. I think for over the many years, these projects, these development agreements have really become way more sophisticated and frankly, I think more lucrative for the city and better negotiated. That's just my observation, and it's hard because you guys are there all the time. I'm only sort of parachuting in and out. But, you know, I guess for an example, the Arts Club development agreement left a lot to be desired. I thought it was kind of a fakakta way to go about doing it. At the last minute, Lauren Meister was able to ask for a very large contribution towards housing, which wasn't even on the table. And within 30 seconds, the developer said yes, which left a lot of people wondering how rigorous was this process and what was staff really negotiating. I think we've evolved since then, but I do think that the Planning Commission having a say is just a good idea. So anyway, thank you for your time and thank you for your indulgence. And I saw you on TV.
Me?
Yeah,
I'm always on.
on the PayPal.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Thank you very much. There's one more public comment.
Wendy Goldman. Wendy Goldman, you will have 2 minutes to be followed by David Eckert.
Good evening, Mayor, council members, commissioners, staff. I have a question regarding public benefit. Some years ago, as a long-term resident here, I have been to many scoping meetings for developments on Sunset Strip and elsewhere in the city. At the meeting that I went to, there were artist renderings of the project that indicated a garden that was going to be established for the community. Somewhere down the line, the developers sold the project to a second party, and the public benefit garden went away. I was not aware of that until the project completed and opened, and it wasn't there. So I'm just wondering, how does someone like myself track these things when developers change midstream and do not exactly have a clear definition of what is going to be the public benefit? So I leave that to you. Thank you.
Thank you. David Eckhart, I believe, was next. And it looks like we're still getting speaker slips in.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Just a quick question, and I know it's subjective, but the word extraordinary public benefits seems very broad termed, and I just, as a public viewer and watching these things, it's very hard for me, or as a layperson, to know what that definition means. And I just wonder if that, moving forward, can be a little more defined of what that means for the public. But thank you all for what you do. I think you all do an incredible job, and keep doing the great work.
Thank you. Do we have other folks signed up?
Thank you, David. We have one additional speaker, Oz Powers.
Thank you so much. I'm an advocate for trans, LGBTQ, non-binary youth, and I would love to see a program that would help some of the homeless youth that are in the center or other places to teach them how to do. I'm a designer, production designer, art director. I was the art director on Avatar and Emmy Award-winning artist, but I love to teach especially people in our community that have been targeted or thrown out of their home, or homeless or struggling, craft and skill of production, design, and artwork. And I would love to see that. There's probably other programs out there, but to coalesce to help those youth produce some of the art that is on the billboards and showcase their work. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Were there any other public commenters signed up in person or in Zoom?
We had one individual signed up for Zoom, but they are not in the meeting.
Perfect.
Thank you.
We can proceed here. Thank you all so much for coming out and delivering your public comments. I'm going to turn to my colleagues on the council to get the conversation started, unless there was any extraordinary need for, that'll be the word, need for clarity on the presentation. Looks okay. Okay, I'm gonna come over to this side. Is anybody ready to begin the discussion? We're all super eager. Vice Mayor, you said yes? Oh, okay, we'll go over there. Councilmember Meister, we'll begin with you.
Were they going to answer what extraordinary is?
Would you like to help explain
I would
that?
like them to answer what extraordinary is.
An extraordinary benefit is a cash payment for an alternative standards project.
There we go.
So it's extraordinary means dollars at this point.
And what about extraordinary design?
That's subjective, and the Planning Commission and Council, staff brings something forward that we believe is extraordinary, and that's a subjective definition.
So then, City Attorney Langer, then Planning Commission can debate whether something is extraordinary design or not. Is that right?
I think the term's exceptional, though. That's
Or exceptional? It used to be extraordinary.
Yes, I think the
When I was
design,
younger.
the design component and the land use component is absolutely something that the Planning Commission should be reviewing. I think it's something that SASSY looks at. That's how I would say it, SASSY, right? The SASSY subcommittee looks at the design of the signs, and if it has that extraordinary, exceptional component to it, the design is part of what they're reviewing.
Okay. We're just doing like initial comments and then, okay. So Wendy Goldman spoke about a change in public benefits midstream without the public getting to, give some input on that. I guess I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but we've had this issue about major versus minor changes. And I think that is something that has caused grief to a lot of residents. When changes happen on the staff, at the staff level, over the counter, on big projects, I mean, even look at like the Sunset Millennium when they took away, didn't that happen over the counter? They took away all the terraces and now it looks like a prison. What can we do to fix that?
So there's a provision in every development agreement that talks about changes to the project. And the way that they've always been framed in the samples that we've used, it explains what is minor. And oftentimes it lists specific things that would be considered minor, which means just in the efficiency of getting these projects going, that the amendment is approved at a staff level. It may also list things that are major. For example, if it requires additional CEQA review, it would be major. And so it's that section of the development agreement where you want to set the expectations for both the city, the staff, and the developer of what is considered major and minor and what can be approved at the staff level and what should come back. Because an amendment requires the full process, right? It requires the Planning Commission public hearing, the City Council public hearing. It's a long process to do a major amendment. So you want to specify in the document what the council considers major and minor.
I guess what I would say is that when you're talking about a project that has a DA, it's usually a very big project, and there are probably very few changes that could be considered minor, where the public wouldn't have an interest in knowing what is changing. So I would suggest that that minor versus major be made extremely narrow for DAs.
Can I just add one thing?
Are we
I'm
not
sorry.
just giving?
Well, I think we're not here to make suggestions so much, to sort of, right, we're not here to give direction or, change anything specifically, just sort of posit what our understanding of things are. Yeah, it's a little complicated, but yeah. So rather than...
It's my emotion.
There you go.
Okay.
It's
Not direction. It's not direction. It's not direction. It's an emotion. The other thing I wanted to bring up is, it's interesting that we give DAs to create certainty for developers, but somehow we haven't created certainty for us, for the city, for residents about getting projects built. There's certainty for them, but not certainty for us. So I'm not going to go on because then it would become a direction. The other thing I'll bring up is on public input. We talk about community meetings, and we just recently passed an item to have community meetings for all DAs, not just DAs having to do with development projects, but also billboards. And one of the points in the public benefits policy is public input and community meetings that staff will discuss the potential public benefits of the project at the initial neighborhood meeting required by the West Hollywood Municipal Code. Staff will present to the community the above general list of public benefit categories, and there's a whole list, and solicit and document feedback regarding neighborhood priorities. I don't think that's ever been done. I don't think that's ever been done. So I'll just leave it there.
Thank you. Councilmember Hanger, are you ready to go? Or did you?
Are we providing commentary or?
If you had questions, if you had clarity, if you had initial thoughts you'd like to share now, or we can come back to you at the end.
Thank you, Mayor. I do think it's important to clarify the role of the Planning Commission in the development agreement process. Under the city's governing framework, DAs are legislative actions that fall under the exclusive authority of the City Council. While the Planning Commission may review and provide recommendations on land use matters, it does not and should not have the authority to approve, modify, or impose conditions on development agreements. The City Council is the only decision-making body with the legal authority to negotiate, amend, and approve development agreements. Any conditions, terms, or public benefits associated with DAs are determined solely by the City Council as part of its legislative discretion. The Planning Commission's role is strictly advisory in nature, and its recommendations are non-binding as they head to the City Council for determination. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, Councilmember Erickson?
Thank you so much. I have some questions. I'll talk about some initial comments. So on page 22 of your excellent presentation, congratulations. Welcome, Planning Commissioners. Last time I was on here with some of you, I was Vice Chair, and I believe you were Commissioner on the Commission, so it's nice to serve a table with you again. Page 22, regarding complications. I'm aware when I was a planning commissioner, most commissioners are asked to bring complicated questions or commentary to you prior. Are you experiencing difficulties with that? It sounds like you are, but I just am trying to understand better, because if questions were asked ahead of time, then we wouldn't be having negotiation strategies in front of development, second-guessing facts and details, stuff like that. I'm sounding like that's a challenge that you've been facing.
I think that there are a lot of times that the planning commissioners will bring us questions ahead of time, and then sometimes questions come out of the deliberation and the presentation and the applicant's presentation, and so I think there's a little of both, yeah.
Great. So you are having difficulty. Wonderful. In regards to page 20, slide 24, you talk about an independent economic consultant. That individual, I'm guessing, is certified, has credentials that most, if I'm not, don't know what the commissioners have in terms of their professional credentials, but a way in which they would be able to provide expertise, correct?
Correct, that's their profession, yes.
So if the planning commission is supposed to be dealing with land use, thank you. If the planning commission is supposed to be solely land use, then why are we getting into like economic calculations back and forth with some of the commissioners? I've seen it happen, but I'm just wondering why that's even an option in their discussion and it's not shut down.
Well, that's the direction that we're trying to get to
Understood.
tonight. Yeah.
Thank you. And I see that as one of your questions. I'm just clarifying for the public because I've seen the public's time wasted as a result of that. Additionally, on page or slide 29, for the evaluation tools, I'm looking back onto some of the conversations in the staff report on page 5 and 4 regarding how we evaluate and some confusion specifically. For land use authority, why is the commission talking about public parks and open space? So for example, I believe it was the Viper Room project. There was some conversation at the Planning Commission that dealt with hours of a museum at some point. Why was that even allowed to happen? I don't think that's land use authority, and I'm reading this as strictly the Planning Commission deals with land use, correct?
Right. Well, for instance, with a conditional use permit,
Sure.
we talk about the hours of operation. I think that that's part of what we talk about in a lot of land use questions, yeah.
But at the end of the day, the Planning Commission should not be negotiating a public benefit that you all dealt with regarding the hours of operation. It just doesn't seem within their authority. I'm guessing, and correct me if I'm wrong, if it's in their authority and you would like that, but I'm hearing that's a no.
And yeah, go ahead.
I think that's part of the conversation tonight, is where do
Great.
you want the commission spending their time?
Wonderful.
All of this, in some way or another, can be connected to land use, design. Some points are purely financial, and so
Yeah.
the council should set the framework of
Great.
what they want the commission focusing on.
Wonderful. And I understand the Planning Commission is not elected by the people, that is us. I know there's some conversations there at times. But my final question is just regarding, I think, the general confusion of what we're having up here, right? We've heard from the public. We're trying to figure out what our role is here. This was a very great presentation. I think it's very thorough. When I was a planning commissioner, I understood this. I've negotiated a few public benefits and development agreements. I'm just wondering, is there a training component when an individual gets put on the planning commission to understand that role? I believe there is, but I just want a confirmation in that way.
Yeah, we train and we meet with each new commissioner when they come on, and we give them all of this background. And again, like part of what comes out of this is going to be what goes into that onboarding as well.
Wonderful. So then in terms of commentary on page 29 for questions, I'm happy, Madam Mayor, to say, frankly, I'm happy to have the planning.
But are you going to give direction comments
No,
right
not
now?
yet. We can go back to it. I can hold that if you would
Yeah,
like.
I think that'd be helpful.
Great.
We'll come to Vice Mayor Heilman, and then I'll come back before we move on to the Planning Commission. I'm sorry to cut you off, Councilmember Erickson. Just want to be careful, get into questions yet. Vice Mayor Heilman?
Well, thank you, Mayor, and thank you to the staff for the great presentation. Thank you to the commission and the members of the public who spoke. I want to go back to something that Jennifer mentioned, having to do with what was happening before we developed this framework and this approach. What would happen is a developer would come to the city with a project and ask for things above what the zoning ordinance allowed, and they would propose what they thought was an ideal public benefit. And then they would shop around the community to try to get other people in the community to get on board. It wasn't necessarily a public benefit that the city had identified. It was a public benefit that the developer thought they could utilize to get people to come out and support the project. And frankly, we didn't always know what the value of that public benefit was. We didn't know the value of the extra density or extra height. So this approach actually is an approach where the city has identified in advance those kind of public benefits that, the council, listening to the community, because we did have hearings on this, the council has identified these as the public benefits that we're looking for as part of a development agreement. And bringing in the consultant using the residual land value, which is standard in the development community, using that methodology to determine how much is the developer getting from this extra height, extra density, or changes. And then having somebody with the expertise to negotiate that agreement, I think that makes perfect sense. And the question about whether the Planning Commission should be involved in that negotiation, I'm not even sure the council should really be involved in that negotiation, because our role I see as setting the broad parameters, making sure that we have experts making those decisions, and having a policy in place that is a broad public policy. With each development that comes forward, I'm not aware of the specific costs of things the developer is doing. I'm not aware of how much in value is associated with this greater height. And I don't think it really is our role to be involved in that give and take. I think our role is to establish the broad parameters. So maybe I agree with my colleagues that it's not the commission's role to be involved in that negotiation, but I also would add to it, I'm not sure it's our role as the council, because we don't have that kind of expertise either, and frankly, we don't have all of the information for those negotiations. The other thing I wanted to point out, because you brought up signage, is what was happening before we used the development agreement process for signs. Before that happened, people would come in and propose large signs, the tall walls. The building owner would get a lot of money from the rental. The sign company would get a lot of money from the signage. And the city would get a one-time permit fee of about $1,500. The city didn't get anything from all of the signage that was being approved. Now with the development agreement process for these signs, there are signs where the city is getting 10 million over 30 years or 30 million over 30 years. Those are extraordinary. It's an extraordinary change. And I just want to make sure that as we have this conversation about development agreements, particularly with respect to signage, people really understand the value that they are providing from development. And then my final point, I have two final points. One, first and foremost is, I think always the decision is this project good for the city? Putting aside the benefits, putting aside the monetary, it's always got to be, is this an appropriate and good project for the city? And then the final point is going back to something Brian said, and that is having this tension between trying to find consistency between projects, but also making sure we're evaluating each project for the unique benefit it's getting and the unique costs of that. So we can't just say all projects, this is the amount, or this is the percentage, because it is going to vary from project to project based on the costs of developing that particular project. I would love to have consistency, but I just don't think it's possible. The framework, however, does give us consistency because it looks at the residual land value for this particular project and these extra benefits, and that gives us the framework for negotiating for that particular project.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Meister, I believe you had a question.
I just have two quick questions.
Two questions.
Here, hold on a second.
Microphone.
Thank you. Lauren, First of all, conditions of use, that is something that Planning Commission decides on? Conditions of use, that's in a project, conditions of use, right? That's in every project, whether it's a DA project or just a standard project.
Right, it's usually about compatibility, to make sure that the uses that are going to be established on the site are compatible and done in a way that complies with code and doesn't create harm.
But also the conditions. I mean, you know, a store is open from 9 a.m. till 9 p.m., and this is open till 3 till 7, and this is how they have to drive in and ingress, egress. So why would that be any different for a project that's getting a development agreement? For example, John's example of how long the museum is open. Why would that be any different than if we were making, or if Planning Commission were making a decision about whether, you know, the skate store should be open past 9 o'clock at night?
Well, first of all, we're not here to talk about specific DAs or specific provisions of specific projects that have been.
No, I'm not.
No, I'm saying with the hours of operation example. You know, some uses in the code specifically have restrictions in them. The time that they're open is regulated. Yes, we are always looking at land use and compatibility. I think the point is that you're looking at the land use, and that is what is in the Planning Commission's purview. How these things function, how they look, how it's complying with the general plan and the zoning ordinance. That's sort of the greater land use authority. Sometimes that means that you're imposing conditions on operations. Sometimes it means you're imposing conditions on how something looks. But it's all under the broader category of land use.
So my point being, whether it's a project with a DA or a project that doesn't have a DA, the process should be the same, and the decision-making abilities of the Planning Commission should be the same in terms of that stuff. I'm not talking about the actual financial.
The only thing I would say is that I don't know that we regulate the hours of operations of museums generally. So in that context, it may have been different. If it was just a museum coming before the Planning Commission, I don't know if there would have been a discussion about hours of operation, because the code doesn't limit them. The code doesn't talk about that. Again, I really don't want to get into specifics about specific projects. That's just what comes to mind for me. I don't know if a standalone museum came before the Planning Commission, would there be a discussion of hours? Depends what's...
I'm just saying, whatever use it is, that would be a consideration of the Planning Commission when they look at a project.
I think the issue was that the public benefit was a museum open a certain number of hours, not really a regulation of how many hours the museum could be open. So I think it was a condition of the development agreement that they provide a museum that was open to the public during certain hours. And I think it is a little bit tricky because it's similar to those kind of conditions where we would limit the hours of operation. This was about how many hours would they be open as a part of that public benefit.
And wanting more, so it was about the public benefit piece, not actual land use operations. Got it.
Okay, all right, well, thank you for clarifying that. And then when the Planning Commission looks at a project with a DA, they are not making the decision about it, right? They are usually making a recommendation.
They're always making a recommendation.
They are always making a recommendation to us. So then they are not deciding something, they are recommending. And that recommendation could be, we could take it or leave it, but it's not a final decision.
For a development agreement,
Right.
that is true.
Okay,
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh,
If I may,
Councilmember Rick,
thank you.
one more and then we're moving on.
I think what I'm hearing in the conflict and in the staff report, though, is that that disconnect isn't clear, correct? That, yes, it is a recommendation. However, what I'm reading in your public document is that you have commissioners engaging in potential, page 20, whatever it is, I'm 29, thank you very much, Vice Mayor. You led me down to I'm sorry. That there is that you are experiencing that difficulty, because on slide 22, you are and I've watched it happen, dealing with potential negotiation strategies at a planning commission hearing after months and months of negotiations in the public benefit that could weaken the city's position and financial standing. And so I think that's what you're asking us to give you very clear direction on here tonight. Right? I mean, it's one of your questions, so I can answer the question yes for you, but.
I think one of the points of this slide was to point out that what is in a agenda packet is the result of a long process,
Yes.
right? And so there's lots of back and forth that happens with negotiations.
Yeah.
Things are proposed, things are rejected, city pushes back, developer pushes back.
Yeah.
So it's a long process where things have been considered and rejected. And so at the very end, to get questions, well, why didn't you ask for this? Why didn't you ask for that? They're hard things to answer
Absolutely.
in the moment because of the long process that it's
And what you're saying to us, and what I'm reading here, is they are not involved in the negotiations. They are involved in recommendations on land use policy, but they are not involved, the Planning Commission being the grant. The negotiations you are having with the developer on a development agreement.
I think Jennifer gave a really good discussion on one of the slides of sort of an overall description of how to look at Planning Commission purview, and it might be helpful if she says it again because I thought she worded it really well.
So I think I'm gonna add like here. Can everybody?
As long as the mic's on.
Can you hear me?
Not yet.
How about now?
Almost.
How about now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think what Lauren is referring to is that the Planning Commission is looking at the totality of the project. They're looking at everything that it took to get to the place where we are. And we're looking for direction, correct, Councilmember Erickson, from the council on what that entails and what pieces and parts to take into consideration. And to Vice Mayor Heilman's point, is the project a good idea? If you're thinking of the project itself, the package of public benefits, and all of the pieces and parts that go into it that have been negotiated in that very lengthy process, understanding that there is also a value to time and to wanting to get projects forward, particularly when we're talking about the Sunset Arts and Advertising. We've had direction to keep them moving forward, and going back to the drawing board on some of these things can take time and can delay projects from moving forward. So does that cover what? Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. I wanted to, I'm going to pick up the comments and then I'm going to move us to the Planning Commission. Council will have another opportunity to speak at the end or towards the end, because who knows if that will be the end. We may come back to planning. But I do want to just say for myself, there was this idea of certainty, and I think that may have also been what you were talking about, Vice Mayor Heilman. I certainly understand that there is certainty through these evaluation tools, and it was, I think, a question of what sort of certainty the council is getting based on these projects. We have no certainty what the future will hold. But I think the idea is when we lock in these development agreements, that's the certainty we're committing to at that time. That is the best understanding, the best set of certainties we can share with confidence to the community. And that's the reality. Everything else is sort of unknown, as we've learned with our own projects that we've taken up on our own city dime, that it's hard to project certainty when we're talking about developing something big and massive, and that's sort of an okay reality. And the best opportunity we have to create certainty is in these development agreements. So just wanted to speak to that idea of certainty that I understand. And then the other piece, getting back to the conversation we just had, I heard this when we were discussing slide 18, and it caught me in a way I had to write it down. Sometimes feedback at the Sunset Arts and Advertisement Subcommittee takes 8 to 10 months to process. Those are specific numbers, 8 to 10 months to process. And if that information at that subcommittee level is going to a commission level, then coming to us to who knows what, that's a thing I don't really understand and I'm trying to wrap my head around. And when we ask ourselves what are council's priorities, I think our city shares the same priority in seeing things get done. And that sort of miredness down in process without a lot of understanding of what's happening or why a set of recommendations from such a small group of people became such a huge scope of work and undertaking for one of our partners in the community that's coming to us to get the best value and opportunity, not just for themselves, but for our city. we're losing out when something is sitting at a subcommittee or taking 8 to 10 months after that point, just before it moves on in the process. So that's the part of it I'm trying to wrap my head around when we're asking what we want out of this long term, and the part I'm really sitting with when I'm trying to understand what we want to see moving forward. So I'll leave it at that. I'm going to move us to the Planning Commission. You've all been very patient waiting for your opportunity to speak, so I appreciate it. And if I can, I'll start with Chair Lombardi to get us started. You often don't get to speak first in your role as chair, so if that's okay, I'll start with you, and then we'll move down the row. Great.
Great, thank you, Mayor Byers. And I first want to start out by saying I'm really happy that we're having this conversation today. I've really been hoping for a while that my colleagues on the Planning Commission can get some clarity on these very complicated matters. So I'm really grateful that we're having this conversation today with the mayor, vice mayor, city council, and also I want to thank staff for having a very nice presentation today to help to guide our discussion. I'll just start with a few sort of more high-level things, and I guess I could also maybe ask a question that may lead to some discussion too, and then I'll let my colleagues handle the bulk of the conversation. So first of all, it is hard for the Planning Commission when we're trying to review these complicated matters to understand where the line is. One thing that has appeared to be of help to me is the fact that we get that time with the community to hear from them, and they're usually more digestible meetings in that our agenda tends to be smaller. So my thought to date has been that actually is quite helpful for maybe queuing things up for City Council. Where it gets complicated is some of the other matters we've been talking about today, which is what are we opining on and what is our purview. I just want to make a note on SASE. I think this is the Sunset Arts and Advertising Subcommittee. One of the challenges, just so that everyone here is reminded, and most of you probably are aware, there are a lot of times where projects will come to the subcommittee that are very, very different than the award that was granted. And so sometimes it can be on the applicant's end that things get delayed, although I'm sure there's both sides to many of these stories. But in some of the extreme instances, I know we've seen a couple of projects that have come back in completely different iterations from the first round, which was different than the awarded, to the updated round again. So that's something that can sometimes cause delay in those ultimately development agreements happening. But if there's a way to streamline some of this, I would be really helpful, I think, for us to understand what we should look at and what we should defer to. And then there's one question that may be of particular relevance at the moment, but just to speak broadly or ask as a question, I know that in the memo that was attached this evening, it was on page 45, I believe. There was a note about development agreements and specific plans, and that they must include language to specify what happens with public benefits if a project is not built. And I'm just curious broadly how this would apply to current projects, and for that matter, our foresight into the future when we're reviewing development agreements as well. So I just wanted to put that out there, and I'll hand this back to the mayor now. Thank you.
I think you have a microphone over there we can share, and if it's okay, we'll just move in this order unless you're not prepared to speak.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for setting this up tonight.
I don't think it's working. Keep it close.
Hello, hello.
There it is.
Thank you so much for setting this up tonight. I think this is a great opportunity for us in the Planning Commission to get guidance from our elected city council members about these issues. I don't have a lot to say at this point. Obviously, as a commissioner, the question that in my mind is always the extent to which you're wanting us to evaluate the adequacy of the public benefits. Because as it's been noted tonight, these development agreements have been negotiated for many, many months. So I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts about that. Something that does come up probably at every meeting where we consider a development agreement is questions about the negotiated language, the legalese used in the development agreement. That's posed some challenges for some of my fellow commissioners. There's always a question of what does reasonable mean, reasonable steps, Force majeure, how is that defined? What does it mean to be extraordinary or exceptional or whatever? You know, though that language is usually best negotiated by our lawyers. But I guess it would be helpful to get guidance from you on whether you would like us, the Planning Commission, to be scrutinizing that legalese and that language and giving our thoughts on it. So that's all I have for now.
Thank you, Commissioner Gregoire. Commissioner Hoopengardner?
Hi. Thank you. And thank you, staff, for doing this, because, you know, we've had this conversation many, many times. And I think my only real major question that I would love to have an answer from out of this meeting, and this I think is probably best directed to our city attorney, is that each time either a billboard or a project with a development agreement comes to us, it comes to us as a development agreement with a resolution, and then a development permit with a resolution. Sometimes there's some additional resolutions, so we vote on 4 or 5 different resolutions. And each of those resolutions has a series of findings. And importantly, the findings, usually number 1, is that this development is in the best interest of the city, as Vice Mayor Heilman pointed out. But at the same time, we are asked to vote to make a finding on a development agreement. That's a separate resolution with a separate set of findings. And the number 1 finding is that that development agreement is in the best interest of the city. So to me, the answer that I most want out of this, because we keep butting heads on this sometimes, is am I to, and my colleagues, are we to make that finding that this is in the best interest of the city or not? Because for myself, I would find it very difficult to vote for something and say it's in the best interest of the city when I see things that are incorrect, there's language that's incorrect, or I just plain don't think it's in the best interest of the city. So to me, that's the single most important question to be answered out of tonight. Are we to look at those benefits and determine if they're in the best interest of the city or not?
I'll start and I'll give you my initial thought, but I think we also want to hear from the council on where they want the Planning Commission to go with that. And I mentioned earlier, Jennifer had a good explanation of what we think the role is. And what we think the role is to look at the totality of the project, the guidance from the general plan, the specific plan, the zoning ordinance, past projects, past council decisions. Was something a big topic of discussion at council when, you know, the next one comes through at Planning Commission. Hopefully we've changed it and we've done, you know, the thing that council wants to do. But it's more of the bigger totality and less on the specific details of each specific piece. Is the public benefit sufficient and adequate and in the best interest of the city? I think that's been staff's approach, and then the ultimate decision of whether or not to enter into the development agreement sits with the city council. And the recommendation from from the Planning Commission is focused on, from a land use perspective, because that's what you're the experts on. From a land use perspective, is this in the best interest of the city or not? Does it forward the city council's land use goals? Does it forward all the things that the city's trying to achieve, or does it not? From a bigger picture rather than a more finite picture. That's been staff's approach, and you know, council can confirm or expand on that later.
So from a development agreement perspective, the finding that it's in the best interest of the city is based upon what?
That it's furthering the goals of the city and not hindering the goals of the city. Just
goals.
Land use. I mean, because land use, and is this, you know, that's what you're looking at. Are you meeting the design goals? Is this adding excitement? Is it adding pedestrian uses? Is it going to activate an area that's otherwise been, you know, that's been dead in a certain part of town? So generally furthering what the council has said they want to see in the city.
Okay, thank you. But that's as relates to the development, not the development agreement.
Well, the development agreement is memorializing the long-term project, both construction and sometimes it has operational components too for the long-term use of the site.
Okay. Now, my last question is, to the extent that there is an error, for example, we had on the Viper Room project a keys thing where it was 5 keys more instead of 5 keys less, and it was blatantly wrong. Everyone agreed it was blatantly wrong and needed to be fixed. If planning commissioners are not to bring up those items, and we just go ahead and rubber stamp them and send them to council and let council catch them, or should we just ignore them? What should we do as a planning commission?
I don't think you should ignore them, and I think Jennifer even mentioned earlier that these documents have improved through this process. Through all of these, it gets better and better each time, and we've improved our internal process too to catch some of these things and to make sure that they're that the cleanest, most possible documents are getting on the agendas. I would say let staff know maybe before the meeting if you have some things that you've caught, because then we can come with a redlined version to the meeting and say we've identified these errors, and then it's already part of the document that you're going to approve.
Of course. Sometimes, but that particular one, I caught literally in the moment. I was reading it and I was like, well, wait, what? So I agree, and staff is used to my lengthy emails and, does send things through beforehand, but this is my question is, if we see something, should we say something?
If you see something, you should say something. And it probably, like I said, probably better before the meeting so that we can review it. Because if we're reading it for the first time in the meeting, it takes us a second to read the language and make sure it's correct.
Of course.
And so earlier is always better.
Of course. Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Jones.
Hi, can everybody hear me? Thank you. Well, first I just want to thank staff for this presentation. I'm going to pull a little card here and just say that I think I'm about to round out my 9th year on Planning Commission, and I've never had this thorough of a review of this, so I really appreciate this, and I think we kind of get this information piecemeal at meetings as we kind of work through these issues, but it's really helpful to have it all in one place in a handy guide that I'm going to genius scan later so that I don't have to have this paper. But appreciate you putting it together because it's super important, so thank you. I also want to thank Councilmember Hang for kind of the portion of our policy that you recited, just because I think that confirms for me Planning Commission's role when we are reviewing projects. And it's not that there aren't nuances that I think are important, and I think we're kind of working through those right now. It's always been my understanding that the final terms of the development agreement, if they are to be amended or adjusted, would be, subject to council approval. And that's not really the province of Planning Commission, so to speak. I think where we've run into issues, and maybe it's better to say confusion, is at a Planning Commission meeting where, there have been questions about whether or not we can make a finding as relates to the public benefits component of a development agreement or a very large project. So I think one of my questions is, and maybe this is just a point of clarification, it didn't seem to me that we didn't have the ability to talk about public benefits or the terms. It's more just because the questions that are coming up tonight really come from a place of wanting to make sure that the public has a say in this process. And it's clear to me from this, I think it's on slide 26, I didn't know there was a neighborhood meeting to talk about community benefits and public benefits. It makes sense that there would be, right? So that's great for us to know that there is a process now for that. But I think for me, what would be helpful to know is, and maybe I'm just asking for some confirmation here, it's not so much that you don't want us to talk about it or that we can't talk about it at all. It's not off limits. It's more just, I don't want as a commissioner to give the public the impression, if someone's coming to a meeting for the first time, they're not here tonight, they don't know anything about our process, right? That we're giving an impression that we have any say in having an influence on the public benefits package. I think that's it's not that it doesn't merit discussion, but I just want to make sure that we're always working within what are clearly very specific kind of guardrails and parameters for our decision-making process. And again, to me, this really confirms that it is about land use and that our comments and our recommendation, because we're not really voting. We're voting to move it forward. We're not voting to approve a project or not approve a project, right? So I think that was really just my ask or point of clarification. I don't think I have any other comments here. I think that's everything. I think if anything, you know, again, I said this at our last planning commission meeting, a lot of bad stuff is happening in our country right now, especially as relates to the way that government is supposed to work. And I don't ever want that to mean that our bar is lowered or that we're not upholding ourselves to like great standards and values. But I think this confirms like we have an excellent process in place and that I can trust that process. And I hope for everyone here tonight that the public also feels like they can trust the process as well. But again, the questions that I'm hearing, just to kind of say back what I'm hearing, really just stem from really just wanting to do right by the public and make sure that the community has a say. So those are my comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Jones. Commissioner Matos?
Thank you, Mayor Byers, council, and city staff, and my colleagues for being here tonight. I think that this is a very substantive discussion that's played out in a public hearing. It's great to have this kind of conversation in community so that everyone understands the role of their government and what we're here to do. First, want to just say a lot of this did affirm what I had already understood the Planning Commission's role to be, looking for general plan consistency, consistency with city code, land use regulations, objective standards in state law, et cetera. So I'm grateful for that clarity. I think that in times of uncertainty on the body, my approach has been to defer to the duly elected body of the people. As such, there have been certain instances on this body where questions have come into play, lengthy conversations on the dais relating to issues that may not even be within our purview. So I think that one discussion that would be very helpful to have and guidance from this council and from staff would be, what is the staff role of guiding conversation in a more productive way so that we can run an efficient meeting and not be opining on conversations that have absolutely no jurisdiction within the Planning Commission. I think that that would be really important for us to understand as a body. And then additionally, I wanted to talk about one thing related to public benefit. When we look at public benefits, I've always understood our place is absolutely not to negotiate any aspect of public benefit or DAs or extraordinary public benefits. One thing that has come up in the past, even before I was on this body as a member of the public, is the adequacy question. Is the public benefit or extraordinary public benefit adequate or inadequate? Rather than having that conversation at the Planning Commission level, because I think that's highly inappropriate, and I actually agree with Vice Mayor Heilman that it should be more betterly suited with staff, is does council think it is appropriate for a recommendation, because that is what we're here to do, to council that asks council to assess the adequacy of said public benefit? Is that a recommendation that would be welcomed by the body? Because that's something that has come up before that we have done. That way the conversation isn't playing out on a Planning Commission meeting, it's playing out with the duly elected body of the people. Lastly, is I just want to touch on one quick follow-up question regarding SASE feedback. I do serve on that subcommittee. I think that there's a lot of really important design review that takes place in that body. And it actually helps move projects forward when those concerns are addressed on the front end versus going through a wholesale multiple public hearing process and then having to go back to revert for Planning Commission concurrence. So I want to kind of get clarity on what the council sees as the role of SASE and design review given these changes to state law, given the will of the people, the duly elected representatives of the people, and et cetera. But I want to thank everybody for giving this really thorough presentation, for being here, and I'm excited to be with you and to receive your direction and continue to serve the duly elected people of the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you have any comments or feedback on that? I think there was a question about whose role it is to sort of manage the meeting conversation, and unfortunately it's ours as chairs of the meeting. But I think that's where, you know, it gets challenging. Frankly, I'll say it from my own role, as I had to cut off my council member just a second ago in the middle of conversation. But it's that sort of balance I think that we all have to have and be supported by, and understanding what our purpose and direction and role is in that meeting is I think why we're here, to help provide more clarity, to empower the chair to be able to manage those conversations. But that empowerment of the chair role, as I know well from my council support, it comes from the support of the rest of the commission or body, right? And so just so you all can really trust in whoever is serving as chair of your commission to facilitate the conversation that's happening as a matter of the public's business to the best of your ability. I think that's really the role there. And you all should be able to support each other in doing that well. That's part of what we're here today. Were there other responses that we wanted to offer? And of course, the city attorney is always welcome to cut us off if we're doing something like blatantly illegal. Okay, great. We can move on to Commissioner Solomon, and then we'll come back.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I never get to go last, so I'll try and be brief. I had one specific question I wanted to ask first, and then I'll make some sort of broad points or questions, but it's probably most appropriate for Brian. You mentioned this is regarding sunset billboards, and you mentioned sort of that application process in this presentation. I'll speak broadly so as not to speak to any specific project, but as an applicant is applying for a billboard, it's my understanding that their application states whether they're applying for vinyl or digital, but they're also only kind of allowed to apply for the grant that they have. A determination has been made whether it's a vinyl or a digital billboard. I guess my question is, what goes into the determination of whether or not an applicant will apply for one versus the other? And in light of recent billboard processes, is there any thought about changing that initial award process?
I'm not sure I'm the best to answer. This is part of the SAP policy, but the board you're referring to, they were awarded a static board. That's what they applied through the design excellence process. And I know there was direction from council to change that, and that's what we're doing at this point. But at the time that they had applied and submitted their application, the award was for that vinyl board.
But I think your broader question is, what do they apply for? And that's up to the applicant. There was different categories. If you had a historic building, if you wanted static, if you wanted digital, depending on your location, they chose what they were applying for and which category to be part of. I don't mean this one building, I mean all the applicants.
And to speak generally, an applicant chooses just based upon their own determination, not because of an award from staff saying you should only apply for
They came to the city and said, I have this one applicant said, I have a historic building, I'm gonna apply for this type of sign because that's what I'm gonna apply for. That's what I need, in order to make this work.
Okay. Then thank you for that. General points as it relates to this. I think our point here is to kind of sit and listen and take direction from council. So I am here, especially as the rookie on planning, to take clear direction from council on what it is that we're supposed to be doing on DAs. Being new to the commission and trying to understand my role and educate myself, I took Title 19, turned it into a PDF and downloaded it, and it's 518 pages. It's here in front of me on my iPad, and that's enough. That's enough to know and understand. But then to jump into a commission meeting where recent discussions have led us to try and unwind the months and months of confidential negotiations that you all have had, and also have an understanding of that. I think, to me, that's outside of our intended purview, whether or not that's our stated purview. I guess that's why we're here tonight. What is our purview? I don't think that we should be redlining development DAs on the dais. I mean, I do that enough every day in my day job. I don't think it's my role to do that as a planning commissioner. That is something that you all as staff and as city attorney, and as the city attorney and assistant city attorney have spent months and months doing. I don't think it's my job to jump into your contract language and say whether or not it should read slightly differently in this clause, but I think that as it relates to this discussion, we do need clear direction. A future item from council that actually does codify this. I mean, the question is whether or not we make a finding on the DA. I don't think we should, but I don't think it's codified to say that we shouldn't. I've been on the Planning Commission for 6 months, but previous to that, I came from the Public Facilities Commission, and I see her in the second row over there, but Helen Collins was amazing at always letting us know what our purview was, and also interrupting us whenever we got outside the bounds of what it is that we could do on the Public Facilities Commission. And at times, that was a struggle, and when it was too much of a struggle, we actually asked our council members, Councilmember Meister, Councilmember Erickson, brought forward an item to actually change the underlying language in the ordinance that's the establishing ordinance for the purview of that commission. I'd ask council to do the same thing again as it relates here. I'm of the opinion that the Planning Commission has far too much discretionary approval authority, especially as you compare the City of West Hollywood Planning Commission as compared to the Culver City Planning Commission, the Santa Monica Planning Commission, the City of LA. I think that we have way too much discretionary approval as it is, just as it relates to land use. And now throwing in this whether or not that we should be jumping into the DA and the public benefits rendered from your negotiations that have taken place. I don't think we should do that, and I think that if council is of that mind, rather than just having a discussion about it, I'm a lawyer, so let's put it in black and white and let's actually codify that. Yeah, that concludes my comments. Thanks.
Thank you. Planning commissioners, was there any second responses, anything? Okay. We'll move back to the council unless staff had any need for clarifications, questions. Yes. Correct. Specific question. Yeah, answering the questions, providing commentary, providing your thoughts. If there's any direction, remember it's about a future item. There's nothing that's coming out tonight. There's no motions happening tonight. Did you want to, yeah, please, Vice Mayor, jump in.
I'll jump in. I'll jump over. So one of the things that came up is, and I think it was very helpful to learn how we actually negotiate, and we first try to assess the extra value that they're getting, and then we use that as the basis for negotiation. I think that needs to be explained anytime there's a development agreement before the Planning Commission and before the council, so that members of the public understand that we have professionals who determine the value and negotiate based on that value. I think it might also be useful, we have this package of community benefits, and I was reviewing it. Maybe we need to say every 5 years that needs to be reviewed. And the Planning Commission should certainly have a role there, as should the community. Looking at some of them, parking resources, still important, but maybe things change, and that isn't as important to the community as a community benefit. In terms of the Planning Commission's role, I mean, part of me is kind of agreeing with Andrew that maybe they should have no role at all in recommending the development agreement. And I'm not sure that's what you were saying, but it's hard to evaluate a project without considering the benefits that are being provided as part of the development agreement. I don't think there's any way to do it, to completely separate, because we're asking the commission to evaluate this project based on the EIR, based on consistency with the general plan, based on transportation, employment, all of the other kind of benefits that are normally associated with the project, plus with these other benefits that have been negotiated as part of the development agreement. And based on all of that, is this a good project? So I don't think we can exclude the development agreement and at least the terms being shared with the commission. But it's sounding like my colleagues are of the mindset, at least some of them, that maybe they don't have a role, the commission doesn't have a role in actually recommending the DA. Going to Lynn's point, maybe they're just recommending the project along with, assuming that all of these benefits in the development agreement are approved by the council. That may be the appropriate, and I don't know if that's even possible. So that's kind of where I'm at with this, that the commission definitely needs to know about the development agreement. The public needs to know about it. The public needs to know the basis for the negotiation. I think our community benefit menu needs to be updated periodically, and we need the Planning Commission's input for that. And then one final point. There was a mention about several projects that aren't being built. I do want to point out that two of the major projects that we have concerns about, the Melrose Triangle, the Robertson Lane, neither one of them were development agreement projects. So I just want to make sure the public knows that as well. There certainly are others that were development agreements that didn't get built, but those two are not among them. So.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilmember Erickson?
Goody. Thank you so much. I am in agreement with what Vice Mayor Heilman is saying. I know Commissioner Matos asked some questions of staff. I actually would like to hear those answers because I think that's very important. I don't know if you have those. You've been taking, Nick, of course you have. And I don't know if Commissioner Matos is willing to repeat them if you didn't capture them all, but I think that helps with a purview conversation.
We're talking about an assessment of adequacy on the public benefit, and if a recommendation to council to assess the adequacy of the public benefit is even appropriate. Because that has been something that has been precedented by this body before. We've done that before.
So one of the ways we've couched it in the past is that we've said that the Planning Commission weighs in on the scope and the range of the public benefits, but not on the amount of the public benefits package. And so it's the land use components of the public benefit package and how they relate to the project versus the dollar amount.
Yes, I mean, that's my understanding, but then my question would be to council, do you feel that that is a sufficient way to continue moving forward of reviewing these projects? I think one of the challenges that has led to some longer meetings than we anticipate is that there's a lengthy discussion about specific contents of the development agreements and dollar amounts and all of those things, but when we get to these specific types of recommendations that go to you all for discussion, it takes the decision making and the discussion making out of the hands of the Planning Commission, which I think is a good thing, and puts it to the City Council. So I kind of wanted to see if that's something that you had as something that the body should continue to practice, or if that's something that you think we should have absolutely zero say in.
Well, I think the commissioner makes a really excellent point because that brings about, and I think it was the mayor that maybe mentioned this, about the confusion that happens in the public then. So people come to the Planning Commission meeting as a result and saying, well, no, you must renegotiate X because it should be worth actually Y. And so you should do that right now. And then when they see a majority, if not all, of the commission vote in a different way, they think that they got screwed and that they're not being listened to. And that false news type of hope is actually detrimental to public trust in the process. And that has to stop, period. So I agree with the role that I think is being laid out. I think it's really confusing and actually unfortunate that the public, and I've watched all the meetings, I was there when it, I see them, I review them, especially when there's an appeal. And I think that's a really big cause of confusion for the public. And I think we need to figure out a better way to do that, right? I'm in agreement with what I think the Vice Mayor is talking about. I don't know how we put that into a staff report. I think we'll maybe have a longer conversation. And I think ultimately the issue is how much of the public's time are we wasting? And I'm really struggling with that because I see Planning Commission meetings go on tangents for sometimes hours of questions that could have been answered in an email that are answered in the way in the public that I think cause a lot of confusion in this process when it is very clearly laid out. And I want to thank Councilmember Hang, formerly Commissioner Hang, Councilmember Hang for laying that out in 5 succinct sentences at the beginning of his comments, and that's kind of been what he said, because that's how I understood this commentary. So I'm trying to understand where that rub in the road is actually happening. I think I know. I'll save it for later. But additionally, I also think that we have to have a larger conversation of if we're not getting if the city is not getting what we need from a body that we appoint, direct or at large, we have to look at that holistically as well. And I think holistically looks at, well, what does an at-large planning commission body look like? Because clearly we need to put in some different Rubicons and a rubric to better understand the training that is actually required. I know that they have the capabilities. I know Commissioner Jones has gone to a conference before on planning and land use, but that's really where it goes at. And I know they have that opportunity, if I'm wrong, to be able to pursue that type of educational outreach. So if there are commissioners that need that extra education, I would encourage them to take to it. Happy to hear what my other colleagues have to say. For the public's benefit, am frustrated tonight. And I want to be honest with that because I'm very clear with what the Planning Commission should be doing. I understand the commissioner's frustration and not trying to figure out where we want them to be. So I'm glad that we finally got here, but we don't need to have this conversation again. I think they should be reviewed every 5 years. Of course, I think that's an excellent suggestion. But ultimately, if there are planning commissioners that don't understand their role, then I think that's a larger conversation. And that troubles me because I think that's a waste of public dollars and time, and I see that. In regards to the SASE conversation, that is troubling, and I think that's a point that we do need to address from the mayor. I don't know the process. I never served on SASE. I served on long range. But specifically, if a project is getting commentary by a commissioner or 2 commissioners, how is that coming back as direction? What is it happening? And if it's taking 8 to 10 months, we do need to look into that because 8 to 10 months means hundreds of thousands of dollars, potential redesigns, and we want a good project. That's not what we're not saying. Housing laws have restricted, what we can and cannot do. But I think we really need to get into how much of the public's time we are actually wasting in some of these processes that are taking long to essentially approve, to build housing, to build affordable housing and housing at all levels, and to make sure our business community, who we love and want to support, knows that when they submit something to the city staff, who are very diligent and work very hard to get it through, aren't harangued at the last second at the Planning Commission level when that's really not in the purview. So I really think let's drill down on those points so that way when there is confusion at a Planning Commission level, staff, and I don't know how you manage this, maybe it's our city attorney, who was, I think, the city attorney when I was on Planning Commission, tells us to no, and we have to listen to that. So those are all my comments right now, and thank you very much for this diligent conversation.
Thank you, Councilmember Erickson. I just want to provide a few thoughts on the question about adequacy. For me, it doesn't make sense to get a recommendation from the Planning Commission to review the adequacy of the public benefits. It should be a no vote from the Planning Commission if it's moving forward in the consideration of the totality of the project. I don't understand why a specific segment of the project would be considered a no, especially when the opportunity for council to deliberate, as we've all shared, doesn't truly exist in that open body. So I think it's a no vote from the Planning Commission, although it's hard and challenging to sometimes say that. I think that's actually what we're looking at. And I say that with some confidence, just trying to wrap my head around. So the community, the neighborhood, has an opportunity to review the scope of the public benefits before they're put into any sort of formal document, agreement that would come back. So I'm just understanding, as soon as a project is deemed extraordinary beyond the general plan, warranting a public benefits or a development agreement, the community has an opportunity to weigh in on what the scope of that is, correct?
Yes.
Oh,
Although I'll say one thing. It's different for the billboard, so
Sure.
we're just talking general public benefit projects. I believe there's only been one project that's actually gone through the full policy so far, and I will let Jennifer confirm that. But so there's only been one.
Okay, great. Okay, and then with that said, because the public has, in this process that's set out, has an opportunity to do that, the Planning Commission is then given this agreement, you have the opportunity to say, no, it doesn't work in service of the larger totality of the project in accordance with the goals of the city or not, and move it forward to the city, which has, or the council, which has the same opportunity to say, yes, this is going to serve the city in the largest way of our goals or not. And staff then can take it back, work with the developer to amend the project and bring it back to a process, right? I think that's sort of the question is, what happens if there's a no, it's not gonna move forward to city, right? We wanna see these projects move forward, but if we're getting no's, they're stuck. It's frustrating. Just give it a second.
They're turning them off so we don't get feedback.
Okay, so let me reframe the question. So you're saying if the project goes to the Planning Commission and the Planning Commission does not agree, then the Planning Commission would recommend denial. So they'd still move a recommendation forward, but be recommending for denial.
Okay, so I think that's the answer that you're looking for. You don't have to tell us that it's an inadequate public benefits project. You recommend denial. We have that understanding of why that recommendation for denial happened based on public benefit concerns, right? Versus moving forward with yes, a recommendation, but looking at the public benefits. I think that's the sort of detail and the concerns that we're getting into. Why would they look into that level of detail and say it's inadequate, but then move it forward with a yes, but just make sure you look at the public benefits, right?
So we're saying don't piece out that one component, look at everything together on the whole.
Right.
Okay.
Is that making sense to everybody?
That makes sense, and there's clarity there. Thank you, Mayor.
Great, terrific. That was something I wanted to drill in on.
Can you, and correct me if I'm wrong, are you allowed to deny recommending a project based on public benefits, not based on the land use?
Well, the development agreements are 100% discretionary,
Yeah.
right? And then, as we've talked about, one of the all the findings are in the best interest of the city. We would tie it to findings. We would always tell the commission, tell us what your reasons for denial are. We'd probably have to come back and write a resolution because it would be very different, and we would want to memorialize what the commission was saying, and it would have to be tied to these specific findings. So tell us why it's not in the best interest of the city, or tell us why it's not consistent with the general plan, or why it has these impacts. So we would tie it to the findings always.
Terrific. That makes sense. Is that clear to everybody in response to that question? Okay, terrific. Councilmember Hang, did you want to jump in?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of thoughts as a rookie myself. I believe Commissioner Solomon mentioned something earlier, like what is staff's role in ensuring that commissioners are not stepping outside of their purview? I think that should be sort of recognized and come to an agreement on. Stepping outside their purview on development agreements and other non-discretionary items. And are there acceptable standards or protocols for recommendations proposed by planning commissioners? If not, I think at a later time we could provide direction to sort of create that. That way it just prevents, various proposals and changes related to unfounded concerns that are personal in nature to commissioners. For example, tree species or double lines going into establishments. So I think that should be recognized. And also, I understand that the public benefits payments are negotiated by city staff, which is made clear by tonight. And it's based on direction from the city council. To me, it would make the most sense that the city council provides direction on what amounts we want to see, both today and also during specific development agreement discussions when they come before us as a body, as an agenda item. Does the Planning Commission have a role in debating the merits of the negotiated dollar amounts? It seems to me that that's specific issues outside of their purview, which is what we're discussing tonight. And I also think it's important that we as a city council provide direction at a later meeting to the Planning Commission so that they can spend their important time focused on what is actually within their purview and not on things that stray outside of what their purview actually is. They have a very important role in looking at what's required, that's required a lot of them, right? And not only will this clear up and provide direction to allow planning commissioners to focus on their important time on their roles, but it also helps city staff better prepare for planning commission meetings. It helps staff to not get super overwhelmed by working on unrelated issues brought at the last minute by commissioners. And hopefully it will make the meetings run smoother and not like 5, 6, 7 hours sometimes. I mean, I was in Japan and I watched that planning commission meeting that went till 2 in the morning. So I think it's a lot of fun. So, you know, those are my comments. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Meister?
Thank you, Mayor. So I have a few comments. I've been watching Planning Commission meetings since 1998, and there were DAs that were discussed during that time, and somehow the Planning Commission managed to get through it. We had a city attorney, Christy Hogan, who, when we got out of our lane, would shut us down. She'd say, that's not in your purview. So if that's not happening in Planning Commission, that is the city attorney's role, and that is something the city attorney needs to look at. Something was said here tonight. Lauren, you said, why is legal, you said, sometimes we're seeing it for the first time when we're there. That should never be happening. Legal should be reading the Planning Commission agenda from top to bottom before the meeting, the whole thing, and the contracts. You know, no, that's, okay, but there have been times when somebody said he hadn't read it the day of the Planning Commission meeting, okay? And that shouldn't be happening, and especially with a DA, if a commissioner who just happens to have, you know, concentrated in contracts, so she's very, very, Commissioner Hoopengarn, very, very familiar with contracts, hadn't read the contract and brought things up, the contract would have been wrong. So if we are going to take away the specifics of looking at a DA from Planning Commission's purview, then I want to know that the city attorney's office is going to be looking at those contracts with a fine-tooth comb. It is not acceptable for those contracts to be going to Planning Commission and not being looked at very, very carefully, because this is a 20-year contract or a 30-year contract, and those contracts have to be looked at. If it's not under PC's purview, then maybe there shouldn't be a resolution for the DA. There should not be a resolution that the Planning Commission has to sign to say that they have the findings that they are okay with the DA if they don't have the purview to make comments about it. It makes no sense to have a resolution that they have to sign. There should be then one resolution, and one of the findings of the many findings can be, we like the DA or whatever. We find that the DA is acceptable or adequate or whatever word you want to use. But they shouldn't have to sign a resolution that says they're good with it if they don't get to do it, if they don't get to look at it, if they don't get to criticize it. The fact that some of my colleagues think that we shouldn't even be looking at it, if there are no checks and balances in this city with regard to whatever, whether it's approval of a project, approval of a DA, whatever it is, then we are done. There's no purpose. There has to be checks and balances. We can't expect that it's only staff that looks at something with a consultant, with a developer. We have to be able to look at that and say, you know what? This is not good enough for our city. Yes, we do need $1 million more. Yes, we do need this public benefit. And the idea that I read about the community, the public input, and the fact that the community at a community meeting is supposed to be able to give feedback on the community benefits menu. I know for a fact that's not happening. That menu is not going to community meetings. By the time it goes to a community meeting, the idea of whatever the developer has decided we want to give, this is what we are going to give in exchange for that, that is what is presented to the community. So when they come to the Planning Commission, are you going to tell the community, sorry, you can't talk about the public benefits because we're not in charge of the public benefits. Not in charge. We don't recommend about the public benefits. And I think that's kind of a slippery slope when you're going to basically have people coming from the public saying yay or nay or whatever. And just in response to Councilmember Erickson's comments about, what service or disservice are we doing to the public? I have only had residents call me after a meeting to say, thank God this person asks questions. If we don't ask the questions, then we are basically, this commission is a rubber stamp, and that's all they are, is a rubber stamp for whatever staff recommends. Is my head exploding yet? No, okay.
You're good.
Thank you. Yes, extraordinary. I know, it's just extraordinary. So I think that as the mayor said, if we don't want the DA to be, the specifics of the DA to be in the purview, then they should be looking at it as an entire project. If a commissioner thinks that the DA sucks, then just vote no. Vote no. But then don't have a resolution that they have to vote for that talks about the specifics of that DA, because that's not fair and it's not right. Again, contract issues has to be dealt with by with our city attorney, with our lawyers, with BBK. They have to be looking at those DAs much more carefully. And I'm also just going to say, by the time the public benefits package comes to us, the train has left the station. And so it's very hard at that point then to negotiate something else, especially since the community has not really had that opportunity, especially if they don't get to talk about it at the community meeting. So that means that at the community meeting, they have to be given that community benefits menu and be asked, what would you like to see as your community benefits? This is our list. Any of these look good? Any others that you want to add? Because if you don't let the community speak then, it's sort of like, well, speak now or forever hold your peace, because by the time it comes to us, it's left the station. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to pick up on a couple of pieces that were just laid down. First, as I look at the community benefits conversation, we have to name that these public benefits, these benefits that get delivered to the public on behalf of a project that is deemed exceptional, extraordinary, something beyond the general land code that exists, cost the project things. And so I think that's important to name, because what we're doing is trying to find a balance in what becomes an exceptional public offering on the back of a project that is already potentially in line with our city's goals and values. And that's an amazing opportunity we have, but a delicate balance to strike. And I think there's a sense that comes with the community benefits that we get to squeeze these projects for every last dime. And I think that mentality becomes troubling, because we do invest our resources as a city in making sure that professional economic evaluation can happen and that we are getting the best ultimate deal possible. And so we do have to have a certain level of trust with our processes, and I really appreciate what Vice Mayor Heilman brought up as an opportunity in the future for us to evaluate the community benefits table that we have. But I think that's a balance that we have to have. We can't enable the public to unleash their best visions onto each project, hoping and sort of asking for everything in the moon possible from a development, to the point that we become so under pressure that we are unable to deliver anything, not just the benefits, but the project itself, right? And so that's sort of the balance I believe we've looked to professionals to help us best strike. So the process, as I understand it, allows for the public to have an early voice, engaged with the developer, and maybe that's not happening as well as it could. I think there's some room for conversation there. And as we're having these conversations, the public becomes more aware of what their opportunities are, certainly. But I want to make sure that the development community is engaging best in what we're hoping to see happen, which are early conversations, right? About, hey, what does this neighborhood need more of? Hey, how can we think about some of these opportunities differently? I believe that when those conversations happen early and well, it enables a project to move forward in the best way possible. And we've seen when they don't happen well that they can also tank a project. But I do want to just make sure that we're understanding any benefit that comes out of a project for the community costs that development money. And that's sort of what we're ultimately trying to find the balance with, is how to get the best value for our city, and to ensure that the project can move forward that gives the public its best opportunity. So I just want to name that. I don't want that to get lost in how we're thinking about this. And I think that is exactly why and where I'm troubled or trying to figure out the best role for not only the Planning Commission, but City Council itself. Because I believe that we have a full opportunity to say no to a project should we not believe that by the many months and years and moons it takes for a project to ultimately reach us from the time it started, which we know could be years, many years, that it is maybe fair for us to say, you know, things have changed. The conversation way back when didn't have, you know, wasn't the best. It didn't get the best public benefits possible, but we wouldn't dig into that on the council dais and try to find what other value we could have. We would encourage that project to probably be tabled, to go back to staff, and to have conversations that way. We wouldn't need to get into any sort of arduous, in the weeds, lengthy conversations. We're ready to, you know, send this back to staff, table the project, and give us something better. I think that is exactly why I'm so concerned about how much time things take, because from the point that we start this conversation with the community to the time it actually shows up at the council's table for ultimate decision, it's too much time, and it may be too much time to really understand if we did get the best value in the long run. So I think it's in everyone's best interest that we find ways to accelerate these processes to deliver what is as close to that earliest vision the community had onto our council dais as quickly as possible, so that the value really feels like it's there and not lapsed by years and pandemics and all the many things that could happen. So that's sort of what I am hoping we get to, is a place where things are happening faster and clearer, with greater trust happening. And we have all, you know, withered down trust with each other as part of these processes. But I think what's happening here is a sense of new confidence happening, a shared understanding, and a greater set of tools that may be possible moving forward. Again, no direction tonight, but it sounds like there's been some really great ideas about what may need to happen moving forward. Vice Mayor is moving his mask, which means he is ready to talk. Okay, we're going to give him the microphone for a second.
Thank you, Mayor. And I just wanted to add a couple of comments. I thought you really summarized things very well. I just wanted to point out that the community benefits are distinct from neighborhood mitigations and neighborhood benefits. The community benefits are supposed to be broad-based community benefits. When you look at most of the things that we as a council agreed on, they're not really the kind of things that we would normally think of, oh, is this something the neighborhood would want? It's more, is this something the broader community would want? So I wanted to point that out. And just to respond to my colleague, I wasn't saying that we shouldn't review the development agreement. What I was trying to communicate is I don't think we should be trying to negotiate the development agreement on the dais. I don't think we have adequate information to do that. We don't know the costs associated with anything we would want to extract. We don't know the costs associated with the particular project. We don't necessarily know the costs associated with the enhanced density or height that they have. So I don't think that's a wise approach. That's why I was saying we need to be setting broad parameters rather than trying to negotiate each specific development agreement as it comes to us. And going back to something that I think the mayor said with respect to the commission, is if you feel that the public benefits are not adequate for this particular project, then vote no. I mean, that's the thing to do, and I think that's what I would direct the commission to do as well. And then just, you know, what Jennifer said about the scope versus the value, I don't think that makes sense, because I don't think you can ask the body to review the scope but not the value, because the scope is directly related to the value. So I would prefer, as Councilmember Meister said, if there's a way to legally do that, don't have the commission make a recommendation on the development agreement. Have them recommend the project with the development agreement that has been negotiated, or not recommend the project, however they feel about it. And then my final point, and we need to have a different discussion, not directed at development agreements, the time issue, because time in the development world, they'll tell you time is money. And so every delay in a project results in less benefit for the community, higher rents, higher charges that need to be passed on because the developer is trying to make a profit. So anything that we can do to protect the community but expedite the process, I think is going to be valuable.
Oh, perfect. Do any of the council members have any further comments? Do any of the planning commissioners have questions, comments, need for clarity? Yes, Commissioner Hoopner-Gardner.
Hello. I think this is all great, and thank you for this. And so my question is, what does state law say? Because state law, you said in the presentation, defined the development agreement process. Does state law require that the Planning Commission approve the development agreement, or is there flexibility? Because that's the only thing I would want us to not run amok.
It's a good question, and I was just going to make a suggestion. State law sets out the process, and the Planning Commission does review development agreements. What goes beyond the state law are our local findings in the West Hollywood Municipal Code. And so if these are a source of confusion, maybe we should narrow them to be more in line with what the council wants to see on development agreements and the role, because it sounds to me like this is creating some confusion, and they don't need to be this broad and this subjective. They can be, you know, does it include all the mandatory requirements? Did you follow the process? Really much more objectively looking at the development agreement process and what we've talked about here, but maybe a little less of all this subjective discussion. You're still always looking at the project as a whole. I want to be clear about that. You are looking at projects that come before you, but on this specific piece, not that I want to add another zone text amendment to the work plan, sorry, Nick, but that might be something we want to look at. You don't have to give direction on that tonight. Let us think about it, but that might be a way to respond to some of this feedback.
Are there any other commissioner comments, questions? Terrific. Council comments? Councilmember Hang had his hand up first.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, there's something to be thought about what Councilmember Erickson said earlier, and it's been festering in my mind. If we take the politics out of political appointments, and this is such this commission does a lot of work, and if we make the seats at large, we take the politics out of.
That's not a part of the agenda discussion tonight, so let's not talk about that if we can.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Erickson, did you have any final comments?
Yes, I want to follow up on something that Councilmember Meister said that I thought is a good point too, and it sounds like that might be universal direction from the council, but it sounds like we are giving, and Christy would do that. I think the direction, and Mayor, maybe you could do a straw poll, I don't know if that's formal, but if commissioners do, or if there is something that is going off out of the tracks, out of the train, you used a train metaphor, out of your lane, right? You know, It would be helpful fully knowing, and it sounds like the commissioners are aware of that, for the city attorney to step in and say, we understand you're going down this chart, this path. Got to, thank you. However, let's bring it back to this discussion at hand. And I think that nice nudge, you tell us all the time on Mondays, Lauren, in the nicest way to say, hey, not tonight. But I think that's a clear direction, and I think that will be helpful for the commission to help gear their conversations.
Yeah, thank you for that, because it's not fair to put that on to the commissioners to make that decision, which may or may not be right, whether or not somebody is in or out of their lane. That is what the city attorney is there for. So I agree.
And that's perfectly fair. I think there's been some disconnect on what the lane is. And so I think this conversation has helped define the lane, because I think when staff and the assistant city attorney have tried, sometimes there's pushback. Well, yes, this isn't our lane, because so I think this conversation is really helpful to guide that discussion at the Planning Commission meetings.
And I hope the chair always feels empowered to rein in conversations as needed, as you've seen me have to do a couple times tonight. Okay, I think we're reaching a point of closure. People are packing their bags, so that's good. Terrific. I just want to thank the staff. I know there was a tremendous amount of legwork that went into preparing for this, making sure that this was going to be a valuable conversation in the long run, which is always strange when we don't have direction. I want to thank the members of the Planning Commission, Rogerio, who's listening from afar, Commissioner Cavallero, and our chair, Lombardi, who typically steers your meetings. Thank you for letting me have the honor tonight. And the members of the public for being here. Your work to hold us accountable is extremely important, so thanks for listening into this conversation tonight. I think we are officially ready to adjourn our meeting to the next regular meeting of the City Council. It'll be nice to be regular again in that way. Monday, March 3rd, 2025 at 6 p.m. here at City Council Chambers in West Hollywood Park. See you all then. Thank you.
Property.
The Holloway Interim Housing Program is the city's next step in addressing homelessness. It'll provide 20 units of interim housing for community members who've been experiencing homelessness. The project will be operated by Essentia, which has been a longtime partner for the city, both in outreach